Thank you so much for joining us. My name is MG Govia. I'm the Education Outreach Liaison of Okie 811. You are attending our fourth session of day 2. Jason Crowe with Green Equipment Company is going to be discussing locating technology and some more information regarding that here in just a moment. If you have not used GoToWebinar software before, let me give you a couple of hints on how to use it. First, that orange arrow, that's pretty much the anchor to the whole entire thing. If you need to get the thing out of your way, hit the orange arrow. If you need to open it up, hit the orange arrow. Within that interface, you'll see a section that says questions. Use that. You can submit questions to Jason or I at any time during the presentation. We'll keep an eye on it. More than likely, all questions will be asked towards the end unless I see a reason to interrupt Jason. But don't hesitate to ask the questions regardless. Also, if you do not know, at the end of today's session, we're going to be giving away a $100 gift card to Amazon. So stay engaged throughout the presentation. I'll throw out a quick trivia question towards the end for an opportunity for you to win that $100 gift card. So with that, Jason, are you ready to go?
Yes. Thank you again, MG, for having me this year.
All right, let's get your PowerPoint up and running to where we can see it.
Let's see here.
You're getting there. Boom, you're ready to go.
We're all ready to see it. Fantastic. Is my camera still on? Y'all able to see me still?
Yeah, let's keep looking at you. You're good.
Okay, good. You guys are still able to see me. Fantastic. Well, again, MG, thank you again for having me. It's a real honor to be able to present again this year at the Oklahoma Excavation Safety Expo. I wanted to thank you guys again. I've been excited to continue to grow our partnership. If those of you who don't know, MG and I have been working together for a while now, and you know, our passion for serving, especially in damage prevention, they truly align. And I just get more and more excited every time we get a chance to talk on what we can do together. And those of you that know me know I'm a bit of an over communicator. And if you saw this last year, there's a lot of information that I'm going to give to you in a short period of time. But there's a few takeaways I want you to take with you. And just know that, hey, my email is going to be on the first slide. My contact information along with phone number will be on the last side. As we go over something, if something sparks interest in you, don't be afraid to take that number down, that email down. Feel free to ask the questions today, but also, you know, don't be afraid to reach out and let's have some further conversations. We've been in unique times this last year with this pandemic, but the people that I serve and the people that MG serves, you know, with utility companies and contractors and the sort, they're the ones that are keeping us going. They're allowing us to work virtually, and I'm doing my best to also continue to work as usual. So if we need to get together and coordinate some kind of, you know, hands-on field training for your team, you know, equipment demonstrations of the sort, please just feel free to reach out to me. So again, thank you to Okie 811 again for all you do, MG for all you do, and allowing me to participate in again this year's conference. Jumping right into this, again, my name is Jason Crowe. I've been with Green Equipment for 13 years now. I've been in serving utility companies, contractors, the energy markets for the better part of 21. So 2/3 of my professional career in this industry has been focused on damage prevention. Today, what we're going to talk about is line locator training. Let me go ahead and use my orange arrow. Oops, I think, let me go back to my PowerPoint here. Forgive me. Oh, let me go back. Technical difficulty. There we go. Locator training. Oh, I did it again. Locator training. Here we go. My email is on the first slide. Green Equipment Company. What we're going to talk about today is the technology for line locating. When it comes to locating utilities, there's not just equipment out there for locating. Use your as-built, use your maps, use whatever other information you have to give you some ideas on where those utilities are. Again, always, number one, we want to call Okie and reach out to them so they can, you know, do what they do with the tickets and communicate to all the asset owners to do the locate. So the people that are locating the lines, these are the folks that I'm speaking to mainly today. Use your maps to give you an idea where things are at, but those maps are only as good as the information that's on them. I know, I mean, I can barely remember what I had for lunch 2 days ago, let alone where that line was put in, you know, maybe 10, 15 years ago. So use your maps. Some early technology for line locating were witching wires or welding rods. I still see people using them today. I'm not very gifted in doing that as well insulated as I am. I don't know if I'm a little too high strung, but holding those wires gingerly as they do, I'm not necessarily the best, but it's still something that I've seen today. Ultimately, digging up or excavating or hydrovacing, whatever it is you're looking for, is a good way to actually pinpoint that line. There's ferromagnetic locators. They look like a stick, and they're designed to locate everything from cast iron, ductile iron pipe, steel pipe, manhole lids, valve boxes, survey pins and the sort. But they're designed to locate just ferromagnetic metals. If you're looking for gold or silver, aluminum, that stuff, that's not going to work. Another type of locating equipment that's out there and available is acoustic type of locating. It's a souped up listening device. You'll see municipalities possibly using something like this for locating leaks, but also for possibly locating lines. If they don't have a carrier wire on their line, you know, we're limited to certain tools that we have available to us. So as we go through these different technologies for line locating, the key is making sure you get the right tool for the job that you're looking to do. Seismic locators is another way that's often used to locate non-metallic lines. In the water departments, we've got a piece of equipment that interrupts the flow of water on the line and puts a mild wave on it and allows you to pick up that pulse on the line to pinpoint it. Next one we're going to be talking most about here is well, we'll be touching on the electric marking systems. This is something that's becoming more and more common in industry today, is these electronic marking systems that some people call them marker balls. They look like a softball or the size of a grapefruit. They'll put that in above whatever the utility is. I've seen them the size of a lady's lipstick, where they'll put them right below the ground. They call them a near surface marker. But there's also a company that we're big fans of, Signal Tape, that have put together a product where they put these markers in a signal tape that you put your utility in, you cover it up with X number of feet of dirt, and you bury this roughly 6 to 12 inches below the dirt, and it's a big colored tape. So if you get someone excavating, they're gonna hit the tape first, but there's also markers in it. Moving on, the electromagnetic line locators is what we're gonna be talking about most today. Those people with metallic assets, you know, water departments, cable company, telephone company, electric utilities, gas companies, that's the one you see most common. The two parts are someone's swinging some kind of wand, picking something up from a transmitter. So what we're going to talk about most today. And lastly, another type of technology that's out there is a ground penetrating radar. Y'all may have seen those on the CSI type shows. They look like a lawnmower, read like a fish finder. They use them to locate dead bodies and that kind of stuff. Well, the ones that we deal with most common is looking for disturbances in the earth. So they're designed typically to locate non-metallic lines. I've worked with gas distribution companies. They're using them to locate sewer laterals in people's houses because they're boring in new lines. Make sure they don't cross bore them. That's an example. What's the only way you can make sure you're 100% positive where that utility is located? Ultimately, it's to dig it up. The equipment we're talking about, and I don't care which type it is, gives you your best guess of where it is. But ultimately, the only way you're going to be truly accurate is to expose it, hydrovac it, what have you. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the equipment you're using, no matter what it is only going to do 50 to 70 to 80% of the work for you. The person doing the line locate, they're the one who's truly the locator. The machine, for example, in these electromagnetic ones are just a transmitter receiver, and it's always going to tell you something. It'll give you an idea of maybe I'm on my line, maybe I'm not, but there's something I should look for. Get as much information before you do a locate. You know, people doing line locating, they may not have that as a dedicated job, or a contract locator that has a stack of tickets. We're always in such a rush, and me, I'm guilty of it right now, talking rather fast. So a lot of it's my just who I am. But make sure when you are doing these locates, get as much information as you can. When I do these live training sessions, we talk a lot about taking 5 minutes on the front end to save you 45 minutes on the back end. So get as much information as you can. Look for visual clues such as transformers, foam pedestals, cable boxes, you know, pipeline markers, fiber markers, anything, hydrants, water valves, water meters, anything you can do to get visual clues of what you're dealing with in the area. Ultimately, the locate needs to make sense. We talk in these live training classes I typically do about, you know, if you hook up on a test lead on a pipeline and you end up at a telephone pedestal, well, it might not be a good locate. If you hook up on a flange bolt and you end up at a electric transformer, well, it's probably not a good locate. So make sure at the end of the day that the locate makes sense. And unfortunately, again, the equipment you use is only going to do so much of the work for you. That's why it's so important to make sure you've got some kind of good training in utilizing whatever tool you're using so you have a good understanding, because there are no magic wands available. There's no 100% tool when it comes to line locating, because there's just so many different factors that go into it. So early on, here's a picture of one of the first line locators that were ever made. And the same principles and theories and the technology behind it still apply to equipment today. So how the locating works. These locators work by a transmitter, and whatever manufacturer you're using, they send an electromagnetic field, or they send an alternating current down the line and creating electromagnetic field. And that's why it locates metallic lines. So I just got off the phone earlier today with a electric utility worker trying to locate a water line for a customer. They're just trying to help somebody out, and it was a PVC pipe without any tracer wire on it. Well, it's not going to locate that. It's not metallic. You're not going to be able to put an alternating current on it and therefore create that electromagnetic field. The receiver itself is used to pick up that signal, that alternating current, that electromagnetic field above the ground. And one of the analogies I like to use when I'm doing these training classes is you visualize that transmitter, that box is the radio station. Radio station is playing whatever you're listening to. And that transmitter is your truck or your car picking up that radio signal, right? It's just something to think about. So a quick visual representation of line locators and how they work, the electromagnetic field above a utility. One of the things I want you to remember from today, and don't worry about writing it down, is these pipe and cable locators don't locate pipe and cables. They locate electromagnetic fields. And that pipe or that cable is going to stay in the same spot until you dig it up and move it. But that electromagnetic field can be influenced by all kinds of things: soil conditions, adjacent utilities, perpendicular utilities, heavy equipment working nearby. But those magnetic fields can be influenced by all kinds of things. When we're using these line locators, and here's an example of one: the receiver, the wand, and the transmitter, the box. There's 3 ways that you can get a signal on the line. One is induction with the box. You see the little thing, looks kind of like a lunchbox, a little screen on it. What you do is you orient that transmitter, depending on which manufacturer you're using, on top of your target utility. And what it does is it emits a big signal out around it and it lights it up. The downside to locating inductively with the box is that it lights everything up around you. So if you're in a congested area and you've got parallel utilities or lines, it has a tendency to jump off and bleed off, and pinpointing your line, it becomes very difficult in that method of locating. The other way to do is what they call an inductive coupling or an inductive clamp. And again, no matter what manufacturer you're using, most of them have them out there, but it looks something like this. It's an inductive clamp. You clamp it around a conduit, you clamp it around an energized cable, and what it does, instead of kicking out a big electromagnetic field around the transmitter, it lights up everything inside that ring. The ring grounds itself out. So lastly, one of the common ways is direct connect. They look like alligator clips, and you tie one to your target utility and one to an independent ground. Again, tie one to an independent ground. Most of these leads look like jumper cables. One's black and one's red, but to be transparent with you, if someone's colorblind, it really doesn't matter with certain manufacturers. So we're going to jump into these direct connect line locating. Most often when you direct connect, you're going to get the best results. The reason, number one, is you get the strongest signal on your line. You're putting the most current from your transmitter down that wire onto your target line. It's most often the most accurate locate method because, unlike inducing with a transmitter, you're not spraying signal out all over the place. You're honing it in specifically on your target line. It'll also give you the most information depending on which manufacturer you're using. You'll most often get a depth, you'll get a direction, you get a more accurate locate. So something to be mindful of. An example of direct connect, you want to make sure you've got a good metal to metal contact. In this picture, we've got a tracer wire on a gas line. You look, they've stripped the insulation off of that wire and got a good metal to metal contact, and then they've grounded it out independently, metal to metal, metal to metal. So lastly, that last comment says, make sure you ground it out at a 90-degree angle as far as possible. I'll be candid, I'd be more mindful of you not to ground it out over something else. Yeah, stick it at a 90-degree angle. And if there's nothing else out there, sure, you can run that thing out as far as you want. But more importantly, don't cross over something else. When it does come to grounding, it's very important because number one, it creates that circuit in your line locator. And I'm not an electrician. I don't necessarily always speak the King's English, but when you're line locating, we talked about that alternating current that's created from the transmitter sent down that line to create that electromagnetic field. Well, the signal's going down that line and it's looking for paths to ground. Well, you want to try and make sure you've got a good ground on the near end where you're hooked up with the transmitter so that signal runs down and then finds a path to return and completes that circuit. As I said, it creates a return path, then completing the circuit. Things that can impact your ground are soil conditions. You travel across the beautiful state of Oklahoma, and we've got a lot of red dirt, we've got clay, but there are some places we've got a lot of sand and a lot of loam, and those things can impact your ground as well. Also, whatever you're using to ground your transmitter can also have a big impact on it. I mean, most of these manufacturers of line locators come with some kind of standard ground rod, but I've used everything from a probe rod to a shovel to a pocket knife, even in a pinch, or a large screwdriver for a grounding object. So other ways you can improve the ground, we talked about using a larger item to ground out your transmitter, and making sure you can get it in deeper into the soil. Maybe you've got a lot of dry soil and you need to get down to some earth moisture, but also pouring some water around that ground rod. I've seen a lot of people do that as well to improve that ground. And depending on which manufacturer you're using on your locator, the transmitter will give you a good indicator. For example, the blue one that we deal with will give you a milliamp reading. And that milliamp reading tells you a lot about your line locate before you even start walking. So those people that I partner with, if they call me up and say, Jason, I'm having a hard time with a locate, I've got it direct connected on, I've got an X on whatever frequency, one of the first questions I ask is, what's your milliamp reading? So check that out before you even start walking. Other ways to apply the signal on the line is that signal clamp we talked about. Here's a prime example. You've got the signal clamp around a conduit going up to a meter at a home, right? The transmitter itself, you're not going to ground it because the clamp itself grounds itself out, and you're going to use more of a mid-range of frequencies. As we think back to the direct connect mode, you're going to use more of a lower range of frequencies, and we'll talk about frequencies and understanding them here in a little bit. But you notice that clamp is down close to the ground. It's not up in the air. It's not looped around the ground. It's going down the side of the meter can there. It's not looped around the ground that's commonly bonded over to that telephone box right there on the house. It's right there down at the bottom on that secondary, and they're doing their best to isolate it. Now, my brothers and sisters in the electric utilities, I can tell you where I live in Northeast Oklahoma, it's very common for the telephone company and the cable company to zip tie their line up that conduit. So if you are using an induction clamp, for example, in this example, an electric utility, make sure you pull apart that phone line and that cable line on either side of the conduit and just clamp around what you're trying to locate. It'll definitely have an impact. So as we go back and touch on the induction mode with the transmitter, again, depending on which manufacturer you're using, will depend how you orient the box. It's less than an ideal method, but sometimes it's one you've just got to use, especially if you're in a sandy, loamy area, you're out there in the sticks, in a rural area, you've got a decent mass of metal. Absolutely. I visualize my girlfriend, she likes to have a flower garden in the yard, and she'll water those things with the garden hose with a fancy spray nozzle on it. She puts a big spray of mist out. If you visualize induction with a transmitter, it's like watering that garden with a big spray of mist. We use that clamp, you're kind of honing that down a little bit more. And if you're using direct connect mode, you're more like putting a jet spray on it. You're able to target each one of those flower plants individually. Just something to think about. When it comes to choosing frequencies, when you're line locating, I can tell you size does matter. It's very important. You want to use the lowest frequency that's going to get the job done. These frequencies, we'll go back to that radio station analogy, of the transmitter being the radio station and the receiver being like your truck picking up that radio station. I live up in Owasso, and I can get an AM radio station from Owasso to Oklahoma City, no problem. But if I put it on an FM station and I pull up to Quick Trip or Come and Go, fill the truck up, pull up underneath the overhang, then bleeds off. Same principle. The lower frequency is going to hold tighter to your target line and be less likely to bleed off. Again, as I just said, the higher frequency is more apt to bleed off, and the lower frequency is going to hold tighter to your line. And much like an AM radio station, it's going to travel further. Now, my brothers and sisters that are into AM, FM, ham radios and all that stuff, I know that analogy is not exactly perfect, but it's something that a simple guy like me can get my head around. I think a lot of folks can understand. So examples of low frequencies, everything from, you look at hertz versus kilohertz. It's important, depending on whatever equipment you're using, noticing, okay, for every kilohertz, it's 1,000 hertz. So as you're reading through numbers of 512, 640, 8K, well, 8K visually, the number is a lower number, but it's a higher frequency. Just like radio stations, 1170 AM visually is a bigger number. 97.5 visually is a smaller number than 1170, but it's an FM station, it's a higher frequency. So again, those lower frequencies, more apt to travel further, less likely to bleed off, more likely to hold tightly to your target line, but will not travel as well down a heavily impeded or a not well insulated conductor. And not that anybody has any problems with poor corrosion issues on their utilities, but you may find old cast or ductile iron water lines that they've got those bell joints with a rubber gasket in them. A low frequency is not going to jump that. You think of maybe an older steel water line, something along those lines may not be coated as well. If they're screwed together and they've got, pipe tape on there, that may not travel quite as well. So if you've got more of a higher resistance application, you got to make sure you bump that frequency up a little bit. Mid frequency, that's where you look to push through a larger conductor and something that's maybe not as well insulated. So you want to make sure that you're going to use this commonly when you're direct connecting and also with that induction clamp. So higher frequencies, you'll find that more when you're using induction with just a transmitter. It's more of a, let me see kind of what's in the dirt and get some kind of idea. I'm not so concerned about pinpointing, but is there something there? And when you're doing a sweep of an area, when you're not really sure where anything is, you're typically going to use a higher frequency, an active sweep with a transmitter or a two-person sweep, which is something we can get connected at a later time and talk a little further about. So we've talked about frequency, and we talked about how size matters with that. And we've also hit on how lower is often better when you're locating. You want to hold as tight to your target line and not jump off and bleed off. I can tell you that power setting is the same. If you visualize in your mind, again, my girlfriend in her flower garden and the analogy of that spray nozzle that she's got on the end of that thing and that wide mist, being a higher frequency, as you adjust that down to more of a jet stream, you're lowering the frequency. If you visualize in your mind, adjusting that spigot at the house is like adjusting the power. If I want to water a particular flower, I want to get just enough water over to it. I don't want to spray the dickens out of that thing and blow the flower petals all over, because then I'll be in trouble, right? So use the lowest power setting to get the job done. If you know that you're hooked up and on a direct connect and you're trying to locate 2 miles, 3 miles on a pipeline, yeah, I want to put the hammer down and do my best to increase the power. If I'm out there in a rural area and there's not a bunch of stuff around me, absolutely. Again, depending on which manufacturer you use, look at that output reading on the transmitter. Again, with ours, you get a milliamp reading to give you a good indication of what your locate's going to look like before you start walking. For example, with our equipment, you have 10 watts that you can have to your disposal, but it's kind of like, that 6.5 liter V8 engine. It's great to have, and I can put my foot in that sucker running down a turnpike, running down to OKC to CMG, but I need to burn gas like that. I'm going to get there pretty much as quick, by keeping it at the speed limit and doing what I need to do. So we've talked about transmitter settings, we've talked about frequency, we've talked about power. And now, as we've got that locate set up, we've got a signal on our line that we believe is going to be best for us. We're going to get a hold of our receiver, and we're going to look at the ways we're going to get that information. And there's different ways to get the information that we're picking up, these different antenna settings. If you look at these line locators, if you open them up, and they all work based on the same principles, they have different antenna in them. For example, if you visualize that round electromagnetic field, all the peak antenna are horizontal antennas, and they're looking for the most amount of that signal going to that antenna. You get often an indication of a louder tone, you'll get a larger number representation on your receiver. You may get a bigger graphical representation on your receiver. The null antennas, older line locators, not the people, the equipment, often had null only or vertical antennas. And if you visualize that round signal, that null antenna is looking for the least amount of signal to get into that antenna. Indications on your receiver will often be a lower, it gets quiet when you get on top of the line. The numbers will get smaller when you get on top of the line. You'll see often the graph move to a lower number when you're off the line. So it's louder when you're not on the line and quieter when you're on the line. So there's omni antenna, round antenna, and depending on the manufacturer, those round antennas are good for giving you direction of your line, depending on which equipment you've got. They'll often give you some kind of directional compass. So, and then there's ways you can use combinations of them to get as much information as you can, a peak response, a null response, and that direction as our equipment does. The other type of antenna you can get on a locator, and these are hardware things with most all manufacturers, you've got to buy it equipped out the gate. We talked about those electronic marker systems, the balls, the lipsticks, the tracer tape. For ours, it's a square antenna that folds down, and it works like a transmitter, and it emits a signal down, and it picks up that microchip that reflects back up. So depending on which type of marker ball you're looking for, whichever one you're going to put on top of your utility, most often a gas guy's put a gas one on there, and they all coincide with the colors of Common Ground Alliance and Oki and proper utility identification. They all have a specific frequency, so this way you're not picking up a water marker ball on a gas line. So a little bit more about these locating antenna modes. The peak mode itself, the horizontal antennas often provide the most accurate locate in distorted fields. If you just have one option, some of my counterparts when I started 13 years ago, they say paint and peak. The technology then, we had one option or the other, paint and peak. The null mode, often with other equipment, will give you a left and right indication of arrows, right? To give you an idea, okay, I'm in the neighborhood. Peak modes don't often do that. With certain equipment, you can use a combination of both the peak and the null. And if they're off, if they don't agree with each other, if again, that round signal, if the most amount of signal and the least amount of signal are putting you in the same spot, it'll tell you the signal's distorted. And then you decide as a qualified operator, okay, how important is I'm dead nuts on this line? Because I'm giving you best practices to identify exactly where your line is. So if you've got to hand dig that thing at 10 o'clock on a Friday night when you'd rather be home with your family eating dinner, curl up watching some Netflix or something, I'm giving you the best practices to get you most accurate. So if the peak and null aren't agreeing, you've got some kind of signal distortion, then you decide, okay, what do I need to do to make this signal more round? The single antenna mode. A lot of these manufacturers, ours included, will use a single antenna mode, which is often a lower horizontal peak antenna, and it offers a greater sensitivity over a wider area. So let's say you've got a line that's extremely deep, 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet deep, and you're having a hard time trying to locate that thing. That would be an instance where you might use that single antenna mode. An example of display on a receiver, you'll get a depth, a compass indication. Here, the little picture of a mountain that right above that 1.78 meters, forgive me, indicates we're in a peak mode. The graph gets bigger, the numbers get bigger as you get over on top of that line. And then that round antenna that gives us direction of the compass. So if we look right above the 3 foot 6 inches, there's a picture of a mountain with a valley on it. This is a peak null indication on a receiver. It gives you directional arrows, tells you which way your line is, and then you get a graphical representation. It gets bigger as you get over the line. So the arrows get you in the neighborhood, and the graph, and the number pretty much pinpoints that thing for you. When it comes to line locating, as you're getting the depth, you go left to right, you've got an idea what the depth is. Some of them are push button depth, some of them are live depth, depending on what you're using. You move the locator left and right. Again, don't swing those things side to side aggressively. You just disorient the antennas. And I encourage people, it sounds like a silly analogy. It's kind of like two-stepping with your partner there. You kind of move your hips a little side to side and keep that thing fairly level. If you do have a distorted field, your electromagnetic field can be distorted because you got two utilities next to each other. Your peak and null response may not agree. Like we saw in the last one, The arrows are flipping in the same spot as where that guy peeked out. Here, we may be getting the arrows to indicate us off to the side. So don't be just caught up in using just the arrows, especially if there's potential for some kind of signal distortion. The arrows will tell you you're off. So don't get caught up in just that. And it will also tell you that your depth is off as well. These depths are heavily influenced by how round those signals are. And if your signal is distorted, then your depth goes definitely out the window. So let's talk about it. As we're out there line locating, we're trying to determine, okay, is that signal round or is it not? Am I right on my line or am I not? Is my depth fairly accurate or is it not? One easy way to do it is to use that peak versus null. Is the peak response matching up with the null response? And depending on which manufacturer locator you're using, will depend on what that looks like on your equipment. Depth validation is another one. You get over on top of your line and you rest the tip of your locator on the ground and you either push a button or you look at the receiver because it gives you live depth and it gives you depth indication. So let's say we get over our line where we believe it best is, we're reading 3 foot. Well, pull the receiver straight up a foot. Don't swing it, just pull it straight up a foot. If I'm getting 3 foot here and pull it up a foot, I'm getting 4 foot. All we're doing is validating the depth on that, confirming that. That's another way to make sure that signal is round. One other way to do it is what they call peak method. We talked about the peak antenna will give you a larger number as you get on top of it, and then it'll drop off as you get away from it. So if you get on top of the utility, and let's say whatever the number reads, 87 or whatever it is, move over and give it this to the left. If I'm getting 87 in the middle and 43 on 2 foot to the left, I'm getting 87 in the middle and 42 foot to the right. Well, equal distance, don't tape measure it, eyeball it. You know, that's one way to check it. But if I'm getting 87 in the middle, 43 on the left, 87 in the middle, and 23 on the right, ooh, my signal could be distorted. So then I've got to decide, okay, what are some things I can do to try and get the signal more round where I'm located? The inverse works the same with the null method. Numbers get smaller when you're on the line, get bigger when you're off the line. So if you're getting 14 in the middle, 63 on the left, 14 in the middle, 70 on the right, that's fairly close. But 14, 63, 14, 33, okay, I've got some distortion or bleed off. And understanding what is it you're doing there, you know, well, MG's planting a tree over on the right side of his yard. Well, we're well over on the left side of his yard. Understanding the true scope of work, that communication be up. Triangulation. Back before these things had push button depth or live depth, what people would do, they used to have a level bubble on some of those line locators. They'd get over, locate the line, and they kick that thing at a 45, drag it out and locate it. Go back to center, kick it at a 45, like you're aiming down towards the target, drag it out and locate it. If that distance is the same, either side of that center line, that's another way to check to make sure your signal's round. You also used to calculate depth that way. The important thing to talk about here is when you have a round signal, when the electromagnetic field on whatever it is you're locating is round, you have the most accurate locate. When it's distorted, you have a potential for being off your locate and off your depth. So let's say that signal is out of round. Let's say we've got bleed off, we've got signal distortion. What are 5 ways we can adjust this signal shape? Again, I know I'm talking fast and I'm trying to convey a lot of information here. So again, if something just clicks with you, do me a favor, take down my number, take down my email, and let's continue this conversation. So if we have distortion and bleed off, what are some ways we can adjust that signal shape? Number 1, change your frequency. Again, in theory, lower frequency is going to be less likely to bleed off. That's not always the case. All theories are not 100%, but it's most often the case. So again, start low. Change how you're getting a signal on the line. You know, we talk about, you know, direct connect being the best way to get the most signal on your target line. Absolutely. Absolutely. But if you're working out in parts of Oklahoma where there's a lot of sand and loam and we can't get that milliamp reading on the transmitter come up, we've got to do something different, or we may have to do something different. And changing where you're getting a signal on the line. You know, when you tie onto a utility, when you're in a congested area, I encourage people to locate into congestion, because much like that water coming out of the end of that spray nozzle, and my girlfriend's using the water of the flower garden, the water pressure is strongest where it leaves the nozzle and gets weaker and weaker and weaker as it travels through the air, just like your locate signal. You know, it's strongest where you're hooked up at and gets weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker as you travel down that line. The next thing that's important we talk about is your ground rod. Make sure that you're not grounded out over something else. I talked to a great guy from the city of Oklahoma City here just a few months ago about last year's session. He said this is one that really stuck with him and really helped him out, was being mindful where he's putting that ground rod. look at that milliamp reading on your transmitter before you start locating, and look at what else is around you. Make sure you're not crossing out over another utility, because that signal as it travels down your line will find its path of least resistance to that ground rod. And if I'm the water guy and I cross over the phone line, well, that signal's going to run back on the phone line and cause that distortion and bleed off. So number 5 is near end and far end grounding. When you're locating a wire type utility, one of the big things that's important is making sure that you're grounded, not just well on the near end, not crossing over something else, but you're also on the far end grounded. So if you're a water company or a gas company and you hook onto that tracer wire and you're looking at your transmitter current, you're getting a very low milliamp reading and you're wondering what's going on. Again, in live training, those 5 minutes to do on the front end to save you 45 minutes on the back end, what you're going to do is make sure you go find that far into that wire and ground it out. You will see your milliamp reading on your transmitter jump, and you'll be able to complete that locate much better. So this 5 ways to adjust your signal shape: low frequency, it's been less likely to bleed off. When you direct connect on your target line and isolate as best you can, you're less likely to bleed off. Locate any congestion. If you visualize, locating any congestion, it's less likely to bleed off. Make sure you're not grounded over something else, it's less likely to bleed off. And make sure you got a good ground on the near end, and you've got a good ground on the far end if needed, so that signal knows where to run. It'll be less likely to bleed off. Again, the more round we make the signal, the more accurate our locate. I can't reiterate that enough. So let's say that our signal's not traveling as far as we need to. I work with people that are locating miles and miles and miles of pipeline and miles and miles and miles of fiber to people that are locating 100 foot in the backyard. So if your signal's not traveling the distance you need to, it's the same 5 things. That lower frequency is going to travel further, less likely to bleed off. When you direct connect line, you get the most current on your target line or the most juice on your line. It's going to be more apt to travel further than if you're just trying to spray it on there using an induction method. Change where you're getting a signal on the line. When you locate any congestion where you're not bonded to things on the near end, it's going to be more likely to travel further, less likely to bleed off. And again, don't cross over something that can steal your signal, so it'll travel further. And lastly, like we just talked about, make sure on the far end that you're grounded. And again, these are mainly things you see in a wire type application, so that signal knows where to run and then can work its way back to the ground rod. The more current we get traveling down our line, ultimately the longer distance we can locate. So how far you can locate depends on a few things. Again, these hard, fast rules in locating, the type of conductor, if you visualize that garden hose, if you have a good insulated conductor, that signal is going to travel down that line further. If your conductor is not well coated, if I've got holes in that garden hose, the water pressure is not going to be great when it gets to that spray nozzle that my girlfriend has watering the flowers. So the diameter of the conductor, a larger 36-inch pipeline is going to eat up a lot of current traveling down that line versus a tracer wire on a water line. So a smaller conductor can carry that signal a little bit better. And again, we talked about the quality of the ground on each end. One of the things that I want to harp on or reiterate is one of the things I tell people when we're doing these live training classes, that the importance of a ground. A good ground can make a tough locate easier, and a bad ground can make an easy locate tougher. So make sure you're doing those 5 minutes on the front end to save you the 45 minutes on the back end. Also, soil conditions. It's been raining here in Northeast Oklahoma. The soil's pretty wet and signal's going to travel a little bit better, but on both sides of that coin, if it's extremely saturated, it may be unique to locate, or come back in July when it's been 115 degrees for 2 weeks. The soil's like concrete. It's going to impact how that locate signal travels as well. So, and again, lastly, going back to what we're talking about, the frequency of that locator. Make sure you get that lower frequency enough to do what you need to do. It'll be more apt to travel further, less likely to bleed off, because again, size does matter when it comes to line locating. And lastly, your power output. Depending on what manufacturer you're using and depending on what the capability is, it just is what it is. I can haul a lot more with a 3/4 ton truck than I can with an S10. That's just basic principle. So be mindful of what equipment you've got, know its capability, and if you do find yourself that you need to locate a distance or deeper lines, make sure you got one that's got sufficient power. So as we're locating, let's talk about that checking your depth and determining your depth. All these things work based on the same principles. Depending on which manufacturer you're using, there's a continuous or a live depth, which is what we have, or some of our previous generation stuff had a push button. And then lastly, that triangulation we talked about, kicking that thing into 45, dragging it out, kicking it into 45, dragging it out. When you are getting depth on your locator, it measures to the center of your conductor, and that's very important. And I don't argue with people about this because one, it doesn't do anything, but most commonly, I mean, it's going to impact you if you're locating a larger conductor. If you're locating a 24-inch pipe and it's reading 3 foot deep, well, you really only have 2 foot of cover. The two things that I've heard people say when we talk about locating in the depth and determining is it the center of the pipe, a lot of people say, well, it's the top of the pipe, or maybe the bottom of the pipe. And it's just one of those things that I reiterate, especially when you're dealing with larger diameter conductors, to be mindful of, okay, what is it I'm locating? Because if you're locating a 36-inch pipe versus a 2-inch water line, that depth indication is going to have a big impact on how far you should mindfully excavate. So as we go back to round of the signal we talked about, the more accurate the depth. The way these things all calculate depth, whatever manufacturer you're using, is to take the signal strength at 2 antenna, 2 reference points, run it through some algorithm in pixie dust, that's technical now, and it calculates depth. So if that signal is round, it's going to be more accurate, hence the depth validation we used to determine whether our signal shape was round, as we talked about earlier. One of the things to be mindful of is, again, we're doing our best guess here. These don't have X-ray vision. They're not magic wands. They're giving our best guess. And if there's a distortion in your signal, your depth's going to be inaccurate. How inaccurate is going to be? Well, that depends. I'm not saying we're going to have to circle back around to that later on. I'm just saying it is so situational. It's just something to be mindful of. So we've talked a lot about active locating, where we're actively putting a signal on the line and picking it up with our receiver. Well, there's also electromagnetic fields on lines that are inherently there. Passive locating is what we call that. Power at 60 hertz. The electricity on at my house right now to be in this meeting, the flow of electrons up and down that secondary electric creates electromagnetic field. We can locate that without the transmitter. Most manufacturers can do something to that extent. CPS for rectified cathodic protection. These pipeline companies will take AC current, convert it to DC current, put it on their pipeline, it keeps from rusting. Well, there's a specific frequency that's emitted in electromagnetic field, and we can locate those. Radio mode on our unit is a passive mode designed to locate telecom lines depending on what frequency the provider is using in the area. Our passive mode has both power and radio on at the same time. So my contractors will use that walking in front of a trencher to make sure they're not going to hit an energized cable. CATV, back before we had cable boxes, you'd run that coax to the back of your TV and made it a certain frequency. That's what that's for. And then, passively locating using a metal detector. We talked about that ferrous metal detector or some other metal detector. You're passively trying to pick up something there without actively putting a signal on it. The downside to passive locating, we're going to get into this, is if I don't have the lights on in the house, my laptop's not plugged in, my refrigerator's not running, the AC is not working, there's no current draw at the house, there's no flow of electrons. So therefore, there's no passive signal line. So be mindful of that. When you're passively locating, there is a potential that you may not have a signal on the line. So just take a few minutes on the front end to confirm that is. Passive locating, again, those witching wires we talked about. You're using the electromagnetic field that's inherently in the earth, that's being utilized or being interrupted in the soil based on whatever you're locating, and that's how that works. There you go. My buddy using his witching rods. Passive locating, we talked about the 50 hertz, 60 hertz, depending on whether you're locating here in the US or over in Europe. The thing is about power, my brothers and sisters in the electric utilities, there's a lot of times that other utilities will commonly bond to their ground. So there's a potential to get 60 hertz on that phone line and that cable line. Be mindful of those things. That radio mode we talked about, it can be on all kinds of things. So again, these passive modes are not always the best tool for pinpointing, but they're kind of a line avoidance type of tool. Not necessarily always 100%, but a good way to kind of give me an indication there might be something there. The practical implications we talked about, as I just said, the same signal can appear on different conductors. Make sure you've got current flow in the line like we talked about. So if it's not, like if my secondary electric, there's no lights on or nothing drawing current, you're not going to see it in a passive mode, especially in newer constructions. There's a lot of neighborhoods that are going up all over the state. One of the utility companies could lay a secondary electric up to the house, but it's not stubbed in. They don't have it plugged in the house. You can't locate that thing passively because there's no flow of electrons. So be mindful of that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when it comes to line locating, again, no matter whose equipment you're using, the success of your locate falls on the person locating's shoulders. That's why I say it's so critical. We can go over so much in a short period of time, but life experience, continued conversations, and having the right resources to lean to when you have questions are critical. So when it comes to line locating and your success, the problem solving abilities, understanding the conditions around you and soil, making sure you're choosing the best method to get a signal on the line, and make sure you're doing the right thing and changing your frequency and power settings. Most of the people I work with, line locating is just a portion of what they do. They're putting in new hydrants. They're putting in new meters. They're doing fault detection on services. They're doing all these other different things, and line locating is just part of it. This is probably 80% of what I do. So that's why the people I work with, I encourage you, if you're out there in the field, give me a call. That's what I'm here for. So ultimately, in time, like anything, the more you become familiar with it, the more you utilize the resources you have at your fingertips, you gain a greater confidence in your equipment. And if we have time, I'll share a story with you here in a bit. At the end of the day, when you have a tough locate, it always boils down to one of three things. One, it's either an equipment issue. And if you call me on our equipment, most of the time I can troubleshoot it with you on the phone and determine if it's an equipment issue or not. Two, it could be a situational issue. It could just be a tough locate. That happens. And lastly, it could be an opportunity for training. So make sure whoever you're partnering with in damage prevention, whether it be myself or someone else, you've got someone you can turn to when it comes to the training side of things that's there to help you, to help make sure that your people are working safely and understand what they're doing with their line locator. So as I go back to a couple of quick stories, unless MG, do we have any questions that I need to chime in on?
Yeah, let's answer a couple questions real quick. Someone asked, do you see excavating companies or the constructor or contractors purchasing locating equipment and locating their own lines or verifying the locates that are taking place?
That's a great question, MG. In a lot of cases, yes. I actually just talked to a counterpart of mine in Alabama before this presentation, and he was talking to me about a contractor that's putting in new gas services for people in the state, and they're utilizing that to make sure they're verifying locates. They see the value in keeping their people safe, and it's also a value add for those people that they're working for. Not only are we going to rely on the good people at Okie and the asset owners, but we're going to take that next step because we understand how important it is to make sure that we do all we can to locate as much as we can. A lot more people are going to it. I mean, there are still some that don't, but there are still quite a few that do. And I think it really just depends on the company themselves, the scope of work they're doing, and how they partner with others and prioritize the damage prevention piece. So great question.
Awesome. Yeah, I thought that was a really good one as well. The next question is about how locating is pretty much the technology has been the same way for many years now. What technology do you see next? I know I personally have seen some stuff with virtual reality and stuff like that. Is there anything that you've seen that you think is viable?
What I've seen, that's great. What I've seen is, and it's like cell phones, right? I mean, we've had cell phones out for what, 20 some years now, and the technology is basically the same, or the principles of how they work is basically the same, right? But now we've got 5G this and smartphone that. Things that I've seen improvements in technology recently, the ability to create your own maps and update your systems with GIS. I've seen some pretty cool things like you can do with the virtual side of things. A lot of folks have got some pretty okay maps, but it might have been Bill, who worked here for 30 years, said that the main line's over on the east side of the road and they got a paper map in the office. Not everybody has the resources and the tools for that electronic data collection piece. So I've seen a lot of improvements there. Also in the ground penetrating radar technology. Those things are so heavily dependent upon soil conditions. And historically, up here in Oklahoma, we've got a lot of red clay, right? That's just it. And when that clay It makes it harder to see through historically with GPR. But I've seen more and more improvements with the antenna configurations on those things to make those more capable. So also when it was locating water lines, the seismic locating, historically the equipment in that has been an L pattern spring check valve, and you get that sucker going and it sounds, kind of extreme, but having an automated solenoid valve switch that's a click, 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 it puts a much milder wave on that line. So those folks with older PVC systems are less concerned about creating new leaks or anything of that nature. So there's a lot of neat new things coming out there. Radio Detection just launched a couple of new products at the end of last year. They're 8200 and 7200. Without getting too far into that, they're just enhancements of the current ones, with the better GPS interface and the sort. So
Very cool. So this is a general question. This is totally a Jason Crowe of Green Equipment Company question. What is the general accuracy of horizontal and vertical? Does that make sense?
What's the general accuracy of horizontal and vertical locate? I would answer that question with a question. I'm not trying to circle back around to this, but it's so important to determine the roundness of the signal first and foremost. If that signal is round, I feel very confident in my location, horizontal and vertical, and that's whether I'm 30 foot deep or 40 foot deep. Now the manufacturer's spec is going to say 5% to this or that, but the important key there is making sure that the signal is round. Now, even with the best equipment out there, if there's signal distortion and you've not done everything you can to mitigate that, then you can be off tremendously. So I would ask the question that, in a perfect world, which we don't live in, if that signal's round, I feel very confident in that, where I would personally feel free hand digging it with a spoon if I need to. That's why I use that analogy of if I'm out there at 10 o'clock at night and it's raining and drizzling, I'd rather be home with my family watching Netflix. I don't want to be off and have to keep hand digging in different locations. But I'm going to take the 5 minutes on the front end to make sure I'm most accurate, and then save myself the 45 minutes in the back end digging multiple holes. So
perfect. One last question. Do you prefer Star Wars or Star Trek?
That's a great question. I'll be candid. I have not kept up on the Star Wars trilogies or the different movies. And as I go back, I would say I'm a bit more of an old school Trekkie myself,
I'm not surprised.
Fair enough. Is there any other questions that we have? Otherwise, I'll share a couple of quick stories with everybody, and then we'll.
Let's go into story mode. How about we do one story, and then we'll do the gift card, and we'll see where we are.
Gotcha. I'll be real quick. Along the lines of that accuracy of horizontal and vertical, early on with my career with Green Equipment, I ended up, planting a couple of flower beds in the back corners of my yard. The utility easement's in the back left corner of my yard. The transformer's back there. The phone pedestal's back there. The cable box is back there. And I thought, I should call Okie, right? That's the right thing to do, right? You call Okie, let everybody come out and locate their utilities and be done. I'm thinking, well, dude, you sell the equipment. You teach people how to do this. Why don't you just take the weight off of their shoulders and just, you do it yourself. Yeah, okay. So I located all my lines in my backyard. Fair enough. Got bushes planted in the back left. My mom's down from Kansas City. They're digging over in the right corner of my yard, and they're digging around. They find something dark about that round, and my mom's freaking out. She's clutching her. Just Jason, we've got a line here. We got a line. And I'm like, no, wait a second. I looked over that area pretty thoroughly, and I cleared it. But again, I was a little bit green with Green Equipment, so I'm over there with a little shovel, and I'm digging around. And I reach in the ground, and I pull out an old Bud Light bottle. And if anybody deals with electric utilities, their primary cable's dark and about that big around. It was an old Bud Light bottle. So there's having confidence in your horizontal and vertical, and in time having confidence in the equipment that you're using. It was a learning experience, but that is what it is. If you want to go ahead and give the gift card away, otherwise, to reiterate on the contractor side of things, my brothers and sisters that are contractors, we have a lot of responsibility on our shoulders when we're working with different asset owners. and I know we do our best to keep our people safe. And the reason why I do what I do, the way I do it, the reason why I try and really be that resource to people to make sure they're working safe was back in June 2010. I was down in Fort Worth at a meeting, and that same day in Cleveland, there was a line strike, and it was a electrical contractor that was based here in Oklahoma. I come to find out, and unfortunately, there was a fatality. You know, we've heard throughout this that, you know, we get a little desensitized to these things because we hear about it all too often. Well, about 3 months after it happened, I ended up finding out some more details. I meet with the contractor, and, you know, I offered their safety director and their VP of operations, the guys, I don't know whose equipment you've got, and I really don't care. I said, I want to make sure that your people are doing the best they can with what they've got. I offer to give some free training. Now, I don't normally do that for people that I don't work with and I'm not partners with, but I want to make an exception. They're like, man, we really appreciate that. That's great, but we don't have anything. I said, well, that's fine. I'm not here to push you to buy equipment, but I want to make sure your people are properly trained so we can avoid this in the future. You know, I come to find out this guy had 7 kids, and this was over 10 years ago. That's 10 years without dad on Christmas, 10 years without dad on Thanksgiving, Easter's coming up, birthdays, and this thing's just crushing my heart thinking about it. So I talked to the safety director and the VP of operations. Yeah, here's some information on mine. I'll give you the guy who sells brand X, brand Y, and brand Z. It doesn't. Let's have a conversation as you guys look to make an investment in some equipment to make sure people are properly trained. 3 months after that, I revisit with the safety director and a VP. Yeah, we're meant to do that. 3 months after that, safety director's gone. Over the course of 18 months with this organization, the safety director leaves, the VP of operations leaves, and I had 2 conversations with the owner of this company. And unfortunately, the last one I had with him was, brother, I can't do any better than free for you. When you're ready to make some kind of investment in damage prevention equipment, and again, I'm not pushing you to buy mine. I think mine's really, really good. I'm still willing to be there to make that same investment of my time and energy and knowledge to make sure your people are working safe. Because I want to make sure I'm doing my part to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. Well, unfortunately, I never heard from that fella, and unfortunately, he's since passed, and I don't wish any will on anybody. But there's just an example of, you know, here's somebody who lost a foreman in their company who had a number of years of experience in 7 years, or in 7 kids, excuse me, and nothing happened. It's not to call them out and shed a dark cloud on anything, but just to remind us that, hey, we are taking people's lives in our hands when we're dealing with this. And this is important. So please slow down, take the time, use the resources you have in front of you. This is a great industry. We've got a lot of great resources with Okie 811 when it comes to ticket management and communication, but also you've got resources in training and tooling as well. Don't be afraid to lean on them. So those are my 2 points.
Absolutely. And Jason, partnering with you over the last couple of years has been tremendous in understanding locating technology, as well as our shared passion for the damage prevention industry. So when I was trying to think of what to ask to give away the $100 Amazon gift card, I decided to pull one random thing that Jason shared today that has nothing to do with locating.
Awesome.
Let's see how good your memory is when it comes to, where does Jason live? He mentioned what city he's from earlier. Oh man, there's so many people know you, Jason. I'm impressed.
I would look at
sorry.
the comments and suggestions and what have you, but
Yeah, it's flying in. So the great questions all the way around. So just to break it down, Northeast Oklahoma. So it's unfortunately it's not Tulsa. It's not here in Oklahoma City as well, but more than half of you have replied with Owasso and spelled it correctly. So the person who first said Owasso is John Todd. So John, congratulations. I'm going to get your email address and I'll be emailing you on Monday or early next week from an Amazon email address to let you know about the gift card. And then bonus points. I wish I had another present, because I can understand where the confusion is. Someone did mention Kansas City. That is where Jason was born.
I am from Kansas City. You're correct.
So that was impressive. That's not the direction I was going, so I do apologize. If I had something else to give you, I totally would. But Owasso is currently where he resides. I can't wait till Jason and I can get together and I get my hands on some locating equipment and learn how to do this stuff. I feel like going through this a couple of times, I'm almost ready to go.
Well, and that's one thing again to remind people. MG and I have got a great partnership, and when it comes to hands-on training of this sort, you know, we have different areas of expertise. I lean to MG when it comes to all the OK 811 side of things, the damage prevention, communication, you know, the outreach and all that side of things. He's the expert in that wheelhouse, and MG leans to me when it comes to the equipment side of things. So if you are an organization that does need some help with both sides of that, feel free to reach out to MG or myself and let us work together with you, because that's what we're here for. So
Perfect. So with that, I really do appreciate all your everybody's attendance. We have
yes,
one
thank
more
you all for
session to
me.
we have one more session to go at 3 o'clock. If you are not tired of hearing my voice, the next presentation at 3 o'clock is going to be pretty much about my current role with OK11 and why I do what I do. So hopefully you can attend. It will be the last chance to win a $100 gift card to Amazon, and that will be starting at 3 o'clock. So if you haven't registered, please go get registered and come back for that. Jason, any last thing before I close us out?
Two quick things. I just want to encourage everybody, if you've not registered for the next session, MG's story is definitely worth hearing. He's got a lot of insight and information that's going to be beneficial for you in this next presentation. And last, I want to thank you all again for being here and participating. Let me share a little information with you. And again, don't be afraid to reach out to your brother here in Owasso. I'm happy to help you. Thank you so much.
Outstanding. Thank you, everybody, and hope to see you in the next session. Have a great day.
Bye.